Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Supriya. I may not deserve such a grand introduction, but I didn't deserve a name like Twinkle either. The last time I was at Heathrow, the immigration officer looked at my passport and he said, "Twinkle, are you a little star?" And fed up about the jibes that I've heard about my name, I said, well, I was a star once, but now, thanks to the effects of gravity and entropy, I seem to have collapsed into a big black hole. His response was classic. He said, "That is brilliant. You Indians speak English all right." At that point, I was tempted to point out two things. One, that his sentence was in fact grammatically incorrect. And two, that after having been British slaves for almost 200 years, it was inevitable that we would learn a few things aside from bowing our heads and saying, "Yes, sire." This proficiency, or the lack of it in English, is also one of the reasons why I was very interested in Muruganatham's story aside from menstruation. You see, the British left our country a long time ago, but perhaps they still haven't left our heads, which is why intelligence in India is still determined by how well we speak your language. Now, Muruganatham is not only the first man to wear a sanitary pad, yes, imagine that, or the inventor of the low-cost sanitary pad making machine, but he's also a man who barely speaks English, and he went from being a dropout to an innovator, and he's been featured in Time magazines as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. To me, he was an example that intelligence is not constrained within the boundaries of any particular language or even a formal mechanism of education, and I was fascinated by that. I first stumbled upon his story while doing some research for a column on menstruation, and it immediately gripped me because here was a man who encountered a problem. He realized that his wife was using unhygienic rags instead of sanitary pads because they could not afford it. He decided that he was going to make an affordable sanitary pad. Now, none of the women in his village were willing to help him test out these pads. So he had no recourse, but he decided to test it out himself. And how did he do that? He constructed an artificial womb of sorts. He took a rubber bladder, he filled it with pig's blood, attached it to a pipe that led between his legs, put a sanitary pad there, and pulled his pants up over this contraption and went cycling around his village. In very little time, he was ostracized from his village. His wife got fed up with his obsession with pads and divorced him, but he persevered. And after many years, not only did he make a low-cost, viable sanitary pad, but he also invented the low-cost sanitary pad making machine, which today he sells only to women's groups and NGOs, so that not only do they have access to a sanitary pad, affordable sanitary pad, but they also can earn a livelihood. Once I read his story, I began pursuing him relentlessly. I called him every day for 8 months, till finally he agreed to let me write an account of his life in my book, and we made Padman. My primary motivation in making this movie was to bring light to a subject that, like Voldemort, is not mentioned. We talk about women's empowerment, but 20% of schoolgirls in India drop out once they begin menstruating. This August, a 12-year-old schoolgirl was pulled up by her teacher because she stained her uniform and the bench with menstrual blood. She did not drop out of school. She went home, jumped off her balcony, and committed suicide. And that is the level of shame and embarrassment around a simple biological function. Only 12% of women in India have access to affordable sanitary pads. The rest are using rags, leaves, and straw, which leads to diseases of the reproductive tract, and there are links to cervical cancer. In the beginning, I thought that perhaps period poverty was only a problem in my country or countries like Africa and Bangladesh. But Plan International UK has found that 1 in 10 girls in the United Kingdom miss school when they have their periods because they can't afford hygiene products. And this was shocking to me. They're using substitutes like rolled up socks and cut up old t-shirts instead of sanitary pads. I'd like to ask all the young ladies sitting here, how many of you have your period right now? Could you please put your hand up? Now imagine sitting here with a rolled up sock between your legs. or balled up newspaper or a rag? Is it possible to even study under those circumstances? Or could you be in this chamber altogether? And yet sanitary pads are treated as luxury items. There's a 12% tax on sanitary pads in India, but brooms are tax-free because apparently it's more important to keep your house clean than your body. In many states across America, Viagra is tax-free, but tampons are taxed. And the only explanation I could think of is that policies are made by 65-year-old men. But what surprised me was that even in England, tampon tax is prevalent, despite the royal family wholeheartedly endorsing menstrual products. Who can forget Prince Charles famously wanting to be Camilla's tampon of all things? I think all women should just move to Canada. You get tax-free tampons and blemish-free Trudeau, and what more could a woman want? When I first met Muruganatham, in his idiosyncratic English, which he proudly calls Linglish, as you saw in the trailer, he told me the same thing. He said, all country want to be strong, but to make country strong, you have to make mother strong, sister strong, woman strong, and then country strong. And that, I think, is the global issue. With Padman, I'm hoping it's more than a movie, it's a movement, where women are no longer held back or embarrassed by their biology, where commercials don't show blue liquid on sanitary pads instead of red, where President Trump cannot try and shame a reporter by saying she's bleeding from her whatever, and where we can't promise all our schoolgirls iPads, but we can give them all the sanitary pads they need. Incidentally, we were thinking of calling our movie iPad, but we didn't because of a biblical precedent. Adam messed with our apple, and look what happened to him. We didn't want that to happen to us. And before I end this talk, I'd like to tell you that there is another reason why I'm particularly happy to be here today. At one point, I applied for a summer school course at Oxford, and there were two prerequisites. The first being that I had to read The Great Gatsby, and considering I had read that numerous times, I thought I was very qualified for the course. But the other stumped me. I also had to be a graduate. Now, like Muruganatham and the other pad fellow, Steve Jobs, I too am a dropout. So this time I'm going to reapply with an amendment at the bottom of my application stating that since Oxford has kindly invited me to give this talk today, perhaps they could let me attend a course or two in return. And I think that'll do the trick. Thank you for listening to me today.
Firstly, thank you for your wonderful talk. We just have a few questions for you, and then we can move to the audience afterwards if they have any questions of their own. But I was just wondering, so Padman was something you originally wrote about in your book, The Legend of Lakshmi Prasad. So for you, literature and film are both sort of modes of communication, and for you, what was the sort of easiest route to express yourself and these issues? Was it the book, or was it the film?
For me personally, I like hiding behind my desk. This, place in the spotlight gives me a heat stroke. So I think I was happy, when I was writing. But then I feel that we're a world of viewers and not readers, really. And if this story had to go across India and across the globe, as I'm hoping, then cinema was the strongest medium. In India, there are just two things which cut across all class and religion and culture, and that's cricket and cinema. Cricketers have their own pads, so I thought, why didn't cinema get theirs?
Fair enough. Also, so the film evidently has a greater social purpose, creating national awareness that you talked about, and destigmatizing menstruation and hygiene around the sort of female condition. So what's your opinion on sort of engendering real change for women? Is it through culture, or is it mainly through government policy, or is there no black and white?
I think it's a mix of both, because how do you change government policy unless culture changes?
Yeah.
So I would say that you have to work in conjunction with two things, with both these things, and that's what we're hoping to do again here. I'm trying to work towards getting GST tax off sanitary pads. Also, you have to look at things in a broader perspective. Even sanitary pads have their own drawbacks, and it comes into, whether it's biodegradable or not, and I'm working even towards that. So I think when you look at something, you have to look at it from a wide perspective and see what needs to be done to that particular situation. But with this, these are the three things. I think government policy, and honestly, I think that, if we had more women in powers of leadership instead of men, or rather if these men like Muruganatham had to also put a pipe and bleed for 3 days, I don't think there would be any tax on sanitary pads. It'd probably be free in all public institutions.
Of course. And also the stigma around female sort of bodiliness and menstruation, where do you think this stigma kind of roots from? And also, do you think why women themselves also shy away from talking about this issue, if you do think so?
I think it's years of conditioning, and right from the ancient time where Pliny the Elder in ancient history wrote about natural history, wrote about dogs getting rabid when they smell menstrual blood and crops failing. Then in 1919 you had a Professor Strick who said that women give out menotoxin. We're a weapon, and so things like that have been coming down over the years. And like I was saying, even for someone like me who's done so much research on menstruation, I've written a book and I'm making a movie. Even today, when I have to go into a temple, I have to have a dialogue with myself, because some part of me, the conditioning that's been ingrained over years, tells me I'm committing a sin and it's a blasphemy, and I have to have this dialogue with myself and then go in. So if that's happening to someone like me, then what about all the other women who've not spent so much time studying this?
Of course.
Yeah.
And also in Padman, so there's an irony that it's a man who's the one sort of instigating this change in the first place. So what role do you think men need to assume in this sort of process for female empowerment?
Well, female empowerment is going to happen at this point in history. It's a very interesting time, regardless of what men really think. In fact, I would say that it's a really terrible time to be a man, And in a way, there's a lot of speculation right now that men are losing their careers because of women and various things like that. But I think that it's about time that women stood up, and if there are a few victims along the way, so be it. We've been victims for many, many years. And like everyone else, I feel time's up now.
Fair enough. So the film also highlights the sort of socio-economic disparities between women, and how this kind of affects their priorities or their concerns when thinking about self-empowerment. So how do you think we can reconcile these differences between, different socio-economic backgrounds? And obviously this film deals with rural India and the issues there.
So it's a multifaceted problem. If like we said, 20% of schoolgirls are dropping out when they begin menstruating, how will they enter the workforce? And if they enter the workforce, in what positions are they entering the workforce? And which means that their financial economic status is also suffering, and then it's a cycle that keeps repeating. So what I feel is that to reconcile economic disparity, education is fundamental.
Okay. Cool. And for the next generation, or like our generation, what do you think are the most important things a mother needs to teach their sons?
So your generation would be called the Generation Z, right?
Yeah.
I think it's Generation Z. You're like up all night on Snapchat and snooze through reality. That's what I think. I think mothers, and I really think that children don't really look at their parents and listen to anything that their parents say. And the more you preach, it's like you're a television on mute. Your mouth is moving, but they can't hear a thing. Yeah. I think mothers and parents both have to lead by example. Yeah. And and children are always watching what you do. So I think if you lead by example, then your child will follow through. And most importantly, there should be no forbidden territory. You should be able to have a conversation about everything, whether it's sexuality or menstruation. At least I try and do that with my son.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We're now going to open up questions to the audience. So if you do have a question, just raise your hand and a mic will be brought to you. I think there's
two. Okay.
Yeah, there's two mics. I think there's one question over here.
Hi Twinkle, thank you so much, and I really enjoyed looking forward for this movie. So my question is, what are your thoughts about menstrual cups? And because it seems more economically viable and also environmentally friendly, can't we directly leapfrog from not having anything to menstrual cups? And how do you think that can be possible?
I think menstrual cups are a great idea. The only thing that would prevent you from using a menstrual cup is if you have an IUD inserted. Otherwise, I think it's a great idea. But also, it depends upon what women are comfortable doing. Some women don't like to use tampons or to insert anything. So it depends upon what a woman is comfortable with. But I think that we have to make sure that we are working towards a sustainable future and using products which are sustainable and biodegradable, regardless of whether they're menstrual cups or whether they're pads.
Any other questions? We go to this lady.
Hi Twinkle. First of all, thank you very much for making a movie about such a topic which is not discussed anytime. And also, Muruganatham is mostly talking about rural India, how he helped women who were not, they didn't know about this much. What about places like Mumbai? What do you think? How can we help people who cannot afford sanitary napkins, even in a place like Mumbai, and where they don't even want to talk about it if we try to?
About not wanting to talk about it, I think that one of the things that I really wanted with this movie, and I think it's already begun as a conversation. For so many years, I've never heard men talk about menstruation. I've never heard them talk about sanitary pads. And now I see groups of men sitting around and talking about it. Even if they're discussing whether to go and see pad men or not, they're addressing something, which has not been addressed before. So that's one thing. The second, about affordability, again, if we have cheaper sanitary pads and cheaper menstrual cups available, then women would be using that. And we also have to build awareness. There is a section of society that feels my mother was using, cloth, and her mother was using cloth, so it's fine for me. But if we spread that awareness, that would help as well.
Anyone else? Can we get over here?
So you've kind of talked about the social and the environmental and the economic aspect of it, but what about the religious aspect? What if some religion or some religions say that we simply cannot let women who menstruate do certain things? How would you argue against that?
I would say that if you're talking about Hinduism, then if you've seen the priests in front of the yagna where they are sweating, and if God is accepting their sweat, he can accept my blood.
Fair enough. Any other questions? Yeah, can we get over here?
Hi, first I'd like to thank you so much for your talk and for coming here. I have a question. I guess put simply, it would be, how do we teach young girls to gain strength from vulnerability, and more specifically to the topics of, for example, menstruation. I remember when I was young, even if I was very close with my mother, being too shy to tell her that I had had my menstruation, and I think it kind of goes with my first question. So how can we help young girls gain strength from vulnerability, and how is it different depending on the country?
By two aspects, by learning from what your mother did and learning from what she didn't do. So you already have a point of view of what your mother did not do, where you were unable to have a conversation about menstruation because it was not an open topic. And so when you go on, and if you have children, you will make sure that the opposite happens. So we need to learn from both what our parents did for us and what they didn't do. And it's and again, we have to lead by example.
Any other questions? Can we get one at the back first? This lady over here. Yeah. Here.
Hi, that was a really lovely trailer. I was struck by you saying that you wanted to get the message across because cinema is something that has carries a lot of weight in India. I sense that there is a sort of model for sort of young men to follow in what they see in Padman in terms of women's equality and how he sees it. I wonder, as a producer and as somebody who came up with the concept, how did you make sure that the presentation was actually kind to women as well as men who are trying to address these issues in the cinematic portrayal of this man?
It was very simple. I stayed as true to Muruganatham's life and his story as possible. And I felt that he was a feminist, more of a feminist than many women I know. And by staying true to his ethos, which is something that I had promised him when we first began this journey, it portrayed both in a kind light, and also we picked a director who had made a lot of films before, which I felt reflected a woman's perspective very well.
Next question. Can we go to at the front here?
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. My question actually ties back into the religious aspect. With the BJP coming into power and bringing quite strong religious views into politics, do you think that's going to slow down government policy changing towards the benefit of women?
That's a very, very complicated question. I think, so far I really don't know about changes that are happening because of in women's issues because of a religious perspective. And when it does come to that point, I'm sure we will have strong advocates against it, and I'll be one of them. So
that's great to hear. Thank you.
And just this man at the back, please.
Other than sort of encouraging more people to watch the film, what other reasons were there behind casting Akshay Kumar as the main actor? because as in it's more because he is such a sort of big force in sort of Bollywood, that wouldn't it have maybe been was there consideration for choosing a young up and coming actor or someone who's less well known to portray the character differently?
So when I first began conceiving this movie, we wanted to make a small movie with an art house film. But there's a documentary on Muruganatham, and how many of you have seen that? No. But there will still be a large percentage who will see a movie which is commercial in that way. And if I really wanted a large number of people to see this film, then I needed to cast somebody, who's an A-list star. The other thing I felt, the other thing I felt is that if you take somebody who's idolized by so many people, and he's holding a sanitary pad in his hand, or rather wearing it in a pink underwear, then I've already cut across many taboos about that subject. So I thought it worked well in that way. This
can we get
lady
another
there,
question?
and there are a couple of questions.
There's just this woman here, at the front here.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It's very interesting. And so I've seen you in different roles. I loved watching your movies as a kid. I know that's something you probably don't want to talk about yet. So that's why what I feel is that you've kind of moved on through different kind of roles in your life. You've been an actress. You've then done interior decoration, and then more recently you started writing, and your book Mrs Funnybones and your articles in Times of India. So I just want to know, who's been your role model through it all? People have their own journeys. At some points they try and define ourselves as one thing or the other. Who's been your role model through these ventures of yours? Maybe your mom, or maybe somebody else, some other woman that you've looked up to in helping define yourself.
I would say failure has been my role model, right? And every time I failed at something, I examined it very carefully. Every time there was an obstacle in my life, I examined it very carefully, because invariably it would reveal something to me, either about myself or about the world around me that I've been unaware of. So I would say that it is, every time you look at somebody who is successful, you have to realize that they have fallen again and again and again, tried myriad other things before they've reached that point. And to not be afraid to keep leaping is what I've always believed in.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Can we get a next question at the back here? This woman right there.
So
So I understand that with the movie you're trying to send out a message, but keeping in mind the outlook of the people and the way the people in the rural areas might think about the movie, are you scared that there might be an opposite reaction from the one that you might be expecting, in a way that, I mean, you could face a lot of criticisms given that you're talking about sort of a taboo in a movie. I mean, people might watch it, but then it might not have the same impact that maybe you want the movie to have on the society. So how would you deal with that?
Before the trailer was out, I was slightly apprehensive as to how people would receive this film and how they would react. And it's been the most viewed trailer that of an Indian movie. And also it's been an overwhelmingly positive reaction. But in order to do that, we had to keep two things in mind. One, we had to make sure that the movie was appealing and it was a family movie. And we really wanted to do that because we want you to come and see the movie with your kids, because they are the ones who really would get the most from that. Come with your grandmother, because she's the one who's telling you have to sit outside, you can't touch pickles and all of that. And so the messaging had to be very clear that there's nothing in this which would be distressing. Perhaps the first 5 minutes you'd be uncomfortable because you're addressing a subject that you really haven't before that. But once you're there, you're immersed in the story. Though we're completely unapologetic about the fact that it's about sanitary pads and it's prevalent throughout the film, there isn't any moment where you'd be distressed or uncomfortable.
Can we go over here at the back, the last row, last hand.
Hi, so I'm here today representing Binti, the charity. Our vision is to create a world where women have access to menstrual products, and we think Padman's like an amazing film in allowing women and families to realise that it's not a taboo. What Binti aims to do is educate children. Is that something you feel is necessary? So like to introduce menstrual classes, for instance, in schools, so that boys and girls both have the opportunity to learn about periods before they even like come to know about them, or for girls, like before they even come to get periods themselves?
Of course, we need to educate children. In fact, there's a comic Menstrupedia which also is distributed and seems to do the job. I remember being in boarding school, and I grew up with a lot of women in my household, so at least I knew what periods were. But I remember in boarding school, the dorm matron telling one of the girls that it doesn't wash off, so don't keep trying to wash it off, just wear a sanitary pad and go to class. And that was education. But I think the more awareness that we spread and the more the conversations that we have, where girls are able to have these conversations, like she said, that she was unable to talk to her family about it. But the more open we are about it, the easier life will get. Even today, even in urban cities, if you're going to the bathroom to change your tampon or your pad, you carry a whole handbag. You don't just take the tampon in your hand. Why? Because you're embarrassed. That embarrassment has to just completely vanish. And that is what education will do. And I'm hoping that, Binti also continues its great work.
Next question. Can we get the next hand along, please? The next person.
Hi, thanks a lot for coming here and for making the movie. I think people will definitely go watch the movie and have these conversations.
I really needed to hear that.
I'm having a very optimistic outlook about this. My question is, it took a man, Muruganathan, to solve a problem that a lot of women have been having. Isn't it ironical? And what is your take on how this even extrapolates to other problems that women face, and if there is a need for men to step in and how that affects things?
Well, there are a lot of women doing things for women, but unfortunately, is anyone really listening to them? Because it's become, sort of, I guess, when a man steps into a woman's issue and talks about it, suddenly you have people, unfortunately, people should be listening when women are talking, and they're not. But when a man steps in, because it's incongruous, I guess, that people start listening. This story was very unusual because it was a man who interfered in what was seen as a woman's problem. And not only that, he came from a conservative background and he discarded all his conditioning to step up and do something for women. So I think that was what made this story compelling. Do men have to step up and solve women's problems? I don't think so. As you can see what's happening right now in the world, women seem to be giving men a sucker punch and pushing them down very, very well by themselves. So I don't think we really need them.
Can we get a question at the front here, please?
I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about the process of when you originally pitched the movie idea to the studio, their reaction, their reception.
So when I came up and I decided that this was something that could be made into a movie, what was very surprising was there was no opposition. My biggest hurdle was convincing Muruganatham that I should make this into a film or write about him. But after that, there really hasn't been any opposition, even with the studio or whether when I narrated this idea to the director Balki. I think our meeting lasted 7 minutes and he was on board. So I really didn't see an opposition, and that was rather heartening. Unlike today.
Can we get the person at the back here?
Very back.
Very back here.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for coming today. So aside from obviously every single person on the planet watching the film being a good metric for success, beyond just viewership and stirring conversation, what does success look like for you in terms of this being maybe the start of a movement or policy advocacy? What do you hope to have happen after people watch the movie?
I don't know what will happen after people watch the movie. I know that my work doesn't stop right now here. And I plan to continue working with Muruganatham a little bit more and to getting his machines into more states, and also trying to make his products are right now 90% biodegradable, and to converting that into a 100% biodegradable product. Those are my next steps towards this project.
Any more questions? Can we get a question over here? Just here, yeah.
Hi, thank you for a very insightful talk. I'm really looking forward to seeing the film. My question kind of relates to what you touched on earlier about cinema kind of having the power in India to transcend class and maybe change mentalities. In recent years, there have been a few films that have touched on similar taboo issues, like I think Gulabi Gang kind of touched on domestic abuse, and then there was Toilet, which touched on women being expected to release their bowel movements in the fields. So I was wondering, after those films, were there any tangible changes in policy or mentality? Do you know what the
No, I'm not
were
really
of
sure what happened about domestic violence after Gulabi Gang. After Toilet, what I'm aware of is that, and there are lots of, I think governments, because it was also in conjunction with what the government policy was, with Swachh Bharat, I think that both of them work together to make a change. Like I said, again, it's culture and government policy that have to go hand in hand.
Any more questions? Can you just pass it to the person over here?
Hi. You said Muruganatham was hesitant to make the movie, and it took you 8 months to convince him. So what were his main hesitation about not making it a commercial movie?
I don't think he really is someone who's particularly interested in fame, or for that matter money. So even after he became famous, his lifestyle didn't really change. When I went to visit him, he was living a very simple life. He sat on the floor, we ate food of banana leaves. He was very excited that he was getting a bed for his daughter. That was the first bed in that household. And his peculiar philosophy in life is around leading a meaningful life more than a life that is filled with money. So I think that he was just simply not bothered rather than anything else.
And do you plan to give all the profits to the charity then?
All my profits? No, but part of my profits, yes. And I'd like to answer that. In fact, Muruganatham himself said something very smart about it. He had a conversation with Bill Gates where he said that what you do is charity and what I do is social entrepreneurship. And it's the same thing about giving people fish or teaching them to fish. So what he does is he makes machines that help women earn a livelihood. And if our movie does not make any money, and if we give away all our profits, then nobody will make a movie based on content again. And that would be a shame, wouldn't it?
Can we just go to this man over here?
Thank you very much for your talk. And I think you have made a really good movie showing the really socio-economic, social important topics in India. My question is related to Bollywood movie industry, but slightly different than you talk. It's about how women are portrayed in movies in India. I'm sorry to use this word, but most of the time they're shown as object of beauty, sorry to say. Do you think this needs to be changed? And in recent years, Aamir Khan has taken an initiative. What are your thoughts in this regard?
I'm not aware of what initiative he's taken, so.
Well, I saw a short clip and he's doing some work like to have this social awareness, like women shouldn't be portrayed as they're portrayed now in Bollywood movies, for example.
I think objectification of women is not just in Bollywood movies, it's in many movies across the board. What's interesting is that objectification of men, you know, have you seen Salman Khan without his shirt coming out? So I hope that that becomes equal, that there are as many semi-clad men as there are women, and then we'd be in a place of equality.
Any other questions? Can we get this man at the back, please, who's standing?
You know, one of the objectives of art, literature, or film is to challenge or question the power. So, in India, which have a long argumentative tradition, we have seen that through our art, literature, music, film, we have questioned the power. At the same time, we give a social message. Last year, I was watching Toilet Ek Prem Katha. It was a wonderful movie and really good humor and a social message. But at the end of the movie, it looks like it's a propaganda film of Swachh Bharat, which is a government program. So, I mean, what are the compulsions Bollywood is having nowadays? We are like 3,000 miles away from Bollywood. So, is it very difficult to give a message without throwing the propaganda of government or like the ruling party?
So my question to you is that if the government is actually doing something useful, should we just make a movie against it because we don't want to be part of it?
No, I don't want to make against it, but the government have Information Broadcast Ministry, Doordarshan, Akashvani, DVP, everything.
Who's watching that?
Pardon?
Who's watching that? So the other point I'm trying to make is that Toilet, I'm not the producer of Toilet, I have nothing to do with Toilet. What I'd like to say is that there was a story, this was a true story which was reported in the newspaper about a couple who were getting divorced because there was no toilet in their house. And this was what the movie was based upon. It was so I don't think that it was something to do with government propaganda at that point of time. For example, Padman is also about a real life story and it's about a situation which is happening in India, but you can't say that it's a propaganda. Right? We're just trying to address social issues. That's it. If one is in conjunction with the government is really not doing anything about menstrual hygiene. So you can't really say that all messaged movies are part of government propaganda.
Yes,
some work in conjunction, some don't.
Is it not possible to not having Indira Gandhi or Modi's photo behind the government officer's office?
But it's there in reality. So what should we do? Remove it? Change it? Put what? Putin's photograph. I mean, it's there in the government office.
Can we get one last question, if possible? Can we go to the person waving there?
Hello, thank you for your talk. My question is more about women in the workplace and the responsibility of menstruating women in particular. There seems to be this interesting dichotomy where if, for example, you have cramps or you're feeling unwell on the first day of your period and you can't go to work, are you supposed to power through and say, I am equal to men and I want to be taken seriously, so I will power through and go to work even though I'm probably not going to be very productive? Or do you think we should stand up and say, actually, as a woman, it is my right to say that my health and something that is out of my control is going to prevent me from going to work? So there seems to be this dichotomy between standing up for our rights but also wanting to be taken seriously. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I think that's a mixed bag, because if women stand up and say, look, I can't come to work because I have my period, there's a chance that we'll start getting diminished at the workplace. On the other hand, if you really are, in a lot of pain, and some women do have, they have endometriosis or they have other issues, and you aren't, then you can just take sick leave. You don't necessarily, what I disagree with is there's a new policy that's been floating around about having menstrual leave, and I kind of disagree with that, because it then again gives, society a chance to marginalize us. So I think it's an individual case, and you have to decide on, which days you can and which days you can't. And if it's particularly terrible, then I guess you would have to just stay home like you would if you had fever or anything else.
I think that's all we have time for today, but thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.